Hi Rob, Jarrett Sullivan here. I was going to write a long response about my experience with Vampire LARP in response to your video, but instead I decided, why not make a video response? This is my first real kind of vlog, which is exciting. I gotta thank you, Rob. That's all because of your video, and I've been wanting to make vlog videos, and then watching yours, I'm like, oh, I have so much to say about my own personal experience as a new player, as someone who was introduced to that world later on, and really wanted to get into it. So that's all you, dude. Thanks. Rob, like you, I grew up in the late 80s and 90s, came to age. I was in a smaller town, not probably as small as yours, but I was in a smaller city. All right, this one is making a lot of noise in this video. Hi. Being a nerd wasn't cool yet, and I watched Ninja Turtles and Star Wars all the time, and for gaming, my brother had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books. They were in the attic. I found them. I would pour through them. I always wanted to play, but I didn't really understand the rules. We didn't really have the Dungeon Master's Guide. I didn't have polyhedral dice. I had some that had been left over from the 80s, but not a lot going on there. And then also it wasn't cool, and I was in the Bible Belt, where like Dungeons and Dragons still meant like devil worship, and had this kind of popular notion that it would cause you to murder people and that kind of thing. So very strange times. So I got into tabletop gaming in college, right before college. Well, I think it was during college. And I wasn't going to play D&D. No, I'm not that type of nerd. But I would play Star Wars D20 RPG. Yeah, justification from back in my youth. Great. Now I'm definitely a D&D player. Pathfinder, 100%. So good. But gaming was something I always wanted to do. When I started playing Star Wars D20 and really got into it, was awesome. And then did it and played D&D, and it was great, and it was everything I wanted as a Tolkien nerd, as someone who had read Shannara and watched as much fantasy as possible and read as much fantasy and sci-fi as possible. D&D was so good, and 3rd edition is still my favorite, and that's why I still like Pathfinder today. So then, having that background, I got to go into the Vampire gaming system, not tabletop, but LARP. Vampire LARP is really fun, really cool, and I don't have a ton of experience, but I do have the newbie experience, at least I did, and that's why I think you'll appreciate this. So back in 2004, I was in college. I had a lot more hair, and I did not have a silly mustache. But I did have a lot of friends that like to play games. We played D&D, we played video games, some old-time Star Wars players, gamers, and then also theater people. So great combination of gaming and theater is Vampire the Masquerade. So my friend John had told me about how the game was and how you play in real life and how you do rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. There we go. Instead of rolling dice and that kind of thing. And it sounded very interesting. So he had been playing at a game in Raleigh, and we were in Greensboro. And Raleigh is a couple hours away. So he had to really sell it. So it sounded cool, and he said, okay, I need you to be like my big bruiser. I want you to be a Nosferatu who's like really ugly and big monster guy, and you're going to be like my bruisers and bodyguard. So he assembled a team of about 5 of us to go with him to Raleigh to play in this game. This was when that minutia of politics and organization and red tape and bureaucracy really wasn't fun. We had to stand in line to be introduced to the prince. That took a long time, but also someone had killed a vampire by sucking out his soul. I can't remember what that's called, but that's the big crime in Vampire, because murder is murder, but if you suck out their soul, then that's really bad. So there was more people in line for that instead of just being introduced to the prince in the town, and so we spent about half that night standing in a line, and my friend John tried to get the information from the harpy that is in charge of the organization, but all she wanted to do was like yell and be mean at people, because I guess maybe that was her like agency as a person, that in life she used vampire as kind of like a way to get that out, I guess. That really is what came across. But that wasn't fun. But then after all that, we got to wander around. There were not just vampires, it was a vampire heavy town, but there were Lycan, and there were wizards or mages, whatever they are in Masquerade. And I wanted to fight them. I was like, let's go fight those humans. I'm hungry, let's do it. And this is when my friend John said, no, they will kill us all. I was like, wait, what does that mean? And so he explained that in this universe that vampires win by outliving everyone. That was a very interesting concept to me, that mages, while super powerful and long-lived for humans, are still mortal. And werewolves, while incredibly powerful monsters and really kind of fun and cool, they also are mortal and will die. And so while they can easily take out vampires, especially lower level vampires, in the end, they're still going to die. Vampires win by living. That was a very interesting concept to me. That's what stuck with me the most from that game. So then we played around. We talked with some other vampires, and we almost got some action happening. And then the night ended, so it was disappointing. So I had a little taste of what it would be like, but not really wanting to come back to that Raleigh game. Wasn't worth the drive. It was only okay. So then later in Greensboro, we're still in college. It's later in 2004. John's like, I'm going to run the game here. It's going to be fun. We're going to have our own college game. We're going to have people from theater and gaming people here at our little tiny college play this game. So there were about 15, 16 of us, I think, but only about 8 could make it every week. I think we played about every week, and then maybe every other week. Theater schedule was crazy, so it's hard to find the time. But and then there were about a dozen probably total that played the most out of the 15. So it was very cool because we did the outside of game work. Like during the week, you would email the storyteller, who was John, about what your character was doing during the week, what points you were spending, and how you were manipulating the outside of the game or the inside of the game by like not physically being there, which was really interesting. It was kind of like playing an online like forum game of Mafia, except with more rules and that kind of thing. So you didn't know who was going on. Only the storyteller could manipulate everything, and that was very, very cool. This time around, I was playing a Bruja. I wanted to be tough guy. I always played fighters in D&D, so this was a very easy thing to go to. I kind of had this punk thing going on where I wore a jean jacket and an armband with the Bruja symbol on it, and I had cuffs with spikes and would spike my hair up. Once again, I had hair. I did. It's gone. This was much more fun, and because it was local and it was small, like Raleigh is a pretty big city, comparative. Greensboro is about 200,000 people, and then our college is only 1,000 students. So my little college, saying like your little town that you're in, you didn't feel like there'd be enough people to play, or maybe in your town now, you don't know if it would be all right to play because it's not New York or LA, just for size. But Greensboro College in Greensboro, we had a great game of about 8 active all the time players and 12 like fairly active, like people that were involved in manipulating things. We had a great time. We'd meet in the theater of our college at night. That was super cool. The theater's a great place to play, is because the game is very theatrical and vampires are really dramatic and that kind of thing. I was a Bruja. It was awesome. We had Nosferatu and all the other different types. The weird like tentacle creepy ones, La Sombras. So we had a whole gambit. And John, our storyteller, is brilliant. He is now a game maker. He makes games. I'll send you a link to his Kickstarter of the game that he and his wife are making now, and it's super cool. You'll probably dig it. Anyway, he knew what to make a good game and what would make a bad game. So we started off kind of the basics. It's about half of us had played before, and half of us had never played at all. So we started off in just kind of the regular town meeting, vampire, minutia stuff. And that was fine. And it kind of introduced us to the world and it got us going. I think we got attacked by some vampire hunters and that made awesome action and we killed them and we did all that. And there was like a rival vampire team or something in town and we had to take them out so that our guy could be the prince of Greensboro. John would use local news and events and college things and stuff in town to color the events. So that was kind of cool, and that was just a little introductory of that. This is here, this is now, in the present. So we moved from the vampire minutia to vampire hunters, and then werewolves came in, and we had a huge thing with werewolf attacks, and John had friends come in to play werewolves, and had other people from school to come in and like play with us, and that was a lot of fun. So it was like very action-based vampire game. And then coming up near the end of the year, because we were going to be graduating and other people were going to be leaving and whatnot, there is a module, I guess is the best way, D&D terms would be module, of Gehenna, the end of the world, the end of the vampire world. It's very cool. And so John decided to do that. So our story kind of progressed, and we went to the end of the world and like vampire like gods waking up and all sorts of stuff. It was 2004 that tsunami happened in the Pacific, so John incorporated that as like a wizard attack on a vampire god that caused that tsunami. So that was a very fun and serendipitous, if not tragic, but interesting incorporation of real world events into our game. And it made it more fun and more cool and felt more real and more alive. It was a lot of fun. We had a great time. So the way I feel about Vampire is, much like a D&D game, you need a really good storyteller, someone that can play through and knows how to manipulate the game or how to keep things moving and interesting. And you need players that are dedicated, that are gonna have a good time, because it is a game you want to have fun. When players are too much into the minutia or too much into self-actualization maybe, and that might be a more youthful problem versus adult gamers. You never know. That's, you know, nerd culture, who we are, sometimes that can influence how you play. And so good players and a good storyteller are key. I don't know anything about the new additions. I know nothing about that. So I do know that a small town, small game is still amazingly fun, and you can have a really good time, especially with your theater background, especially with knowing theater and how to drive those things. I think you can have a really good time. Also, you brought up the like New York versus Denver versus LA type of thing, where I think your idea with like cowboy vampires from Gold Rush time or whatever in Colorado, that would be super cool. 'Cause you could even have like some guy who didn't even change out of his cowboy clothes and like hangs out in an old house or like in a ranch or under a ranch or has been in torpor forever and comes out from like, he's still all cowboy, gotta get the gold and blood type of guy, vampire, who's been essentially, you know, asleep for a couple hundred years. That could be a cool character and maybe a bit silly or maybe too kind of Wild Wasteland Fallout style. But, you know, if that's your game, if that's the color you want, then do it. The game does lend to that personalization like you were talking about. You can really make it your own. You don't have to stay so hardline if you don't want to, because it's your game. So it definitely lends itself to that. There's tons of background and rules and things for you to use if you want. And if you don't want to use a particular like haughty Lestat Dracula style vampire, you don't need to at all. In our game in Greensboro, we all were very character driven and very different types of vampires. We did have a guy that would wear the suit all the time, but we had the mafioso guys and we had the like weird guys, and I was the punk kind of guy, and it was fun. It was cool to have that difference. And then went to a game in New York. One day, I went to a Vampire LARP with John. It was only okay. It was in a theater, which was cool, and that felt good. But, you know, and they had 20 players, but it really was too... Half the people were cool, half the people were only okay. And they didn't really lend themselves to being in New York and doing New York things from what I could tell. So even in New York or LA, in a bigger city, that doesn't necessarily facilitate a good game of Vampire. It could, having like a really big game of Vampire going on with 100 players like in New York City on the street and dealing with people walking by, and that as real life game, like you have to meta game a little bit, but that could be very cool. But we played in a small college theater and it was awesome. I think that's pretty much it. I was going to type all that out and it was a lot. And I've been wanting to get into video blogging, and so I'm going to thank you, Rob, for, you know, incidentally kind of making this happen, where I was like, I'm going to set up the camera, I'm going to have not great lighting, and I'm going to make this happen.
Hi, Rob.
Jess says hi.